Hello and welcome to Lesson 1 for the short story 10 Minutes Musing by Alice Dunbar Nelson. If we haven't met, my name is Sarah Hoshikwelu from Free Your English. I help intermediate to advanced learners of English use English literature as a motivation to move forward to do lots of reading and speaking. And it is my mission to help you communicate in your English with greater clarity and confidence. So this is effectively a mini course on this wonderful short story. There are 4 lessons, and we are going to, in those 4 lessons, look at the following. Lesson 1 is an introduction to the author and also the context of the story. Lesson 2, we will look at pre-reading vocabulary. Lesson 3 will be a read-along, and then Lesson 4, we will look at discussing the meaning of the story. So in terms of an introduction, we'll first look at the author and the context in which she was writing. Alice Dunbar Nelson was an accomplished woman. She was a poet, novelist, journalist, teacher, diarist, political activist for civil rights. She supported and worked for women's rights and women's suffrage. She was also part of an artistic movement known as the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance was a significant social and cultural movement which happened as thousands of African Americans left the South, moving to look for better opportunities and also to attempt to escape institutionalized racism. African American musicians and authors, they gathered in Harlem and they painted, composed music, performed, wrote, and just created and inspired each other. Harlem is a neighborhood in New York in the United States, and this movement was happening from roughly 1910s to the mid-1930s. Langston Hughes was one of the most famous authors of the Harlem Renaissance, and he wrote about the struggles of African Americans. The outcome of artistic genius that came from the Harlem Renaissance, it needs to be said, came despite immense oppression and systemic racism. And the artists of the Harlem Renaissance, they rightfully wanted to take pride in and celebrate their history, their roots, achievements, and culture. And these important artistic contributions of the Harlem Renaissance, they continue to provide inspiration. Alice Dunbar Nelson was part of the first generation of Black Americans to be born free in the South after slavery had ended, following the American Civil War. She published the story that we're going to read when she was very young, and in her life she worked, as I've said, as many different things, including a teacher and of course being a published author. So there you have an incredibly short summary of the Harlem Renaissance, which is part of the context of her writing, and a very brief introduction to Alice Dunbar Nelson. Okay, pause the video. Imagine that you are in a classroom, and imagine I've asked you to turn to your speaking partner and take a moment to answer this question. What was the Harlem Renaissance? Just go ahead and talk about it in your own words, or you could jot down on a piece of paper what you remember about it, and perhaps what questions do you still have? Of course, within such a short amount of time, it's hard to do justice to these really important topics. So I really encourage you to look further into the Harlem Renaissance and the issues that surrounded this flowering of artistic talent. And I also would love to say that even in this introduction, there might be quite a few words that you are not sure of. So if you would love to have a vocabulary overview and a transcript of this lesson 1, then I would encourage you to check the link in the description. I welcome your comments and questions in the comment section, and I look forward to continuing with you as we look at the pre-reading vocabulary and, of course, actually reading the story. Thanks. Bye for now. Hello and welcome back to lesson 2 of this mini course on the short story 10 Minutes Musing by Alice Dunbar Nelson. If we haven't met, my name is Sarah Hosha-Coelho. I'm dual trained as an English literature teacher and also as an English as a second language teacher. And I love to combine the two to give a really good creative challenge for people that are learning English at the intermediate to advanced level. The short story that we are looking at, 10 Minutes Musing, is definitely an advanced story. If you are an intermediate learner, then I would recommend that you still give it a go. And no matter what level you're at, please know that the vocabulary will be quite challenging. Our goal in this vocabulary lesson is just to go through the most useful vocabulary that you need to know so that you will be able to get a good general grasp of the story when you read it at a first go. If you haven't looked at lesson number 1, I really recommend that you go back and look at lesson 1, where we go through a brief introduction to the life of the author and the context in which she was writing. And it's important to know that my intention in sharing her work is to honor her life and work as a Black female author who made an important contribution to the field of English literature. Okay, so all of that being said, let's jump in, let's look at these vocabulary words, and let's do it with an attitude that we are taking on quite a big challenge, but we're going to give it a go, okay? So the first word that it makes sense to look at is, of course, the word musing, which is found within the title, which means a period of reflection or thought. Okay, take a moment, pause the video, and record yourself speaking your response to this pre-reading question. What does the title, 10 Minutes Musing, make you think of? Let's jump into looking at the words that will come up in the story. So the first one we'll look at is the word intermission, which means a pause or a break, and it's a really formal word. So we often use it for the theatre or classical music concerts or opera, formal situations. For example, we went to the bar for a quick drink when the play had an intermission after the first act. It is also used for educational settings to show that there's a break from lessons. For example, the students ran around in the playground during intermission. To peep, which is a verb, and it means to look quickly or secretively. So for example, I heard a noise in the street and peeped out of the window to see what it was. Melee, tough pronunciation, melee, means a big fight or a large crowd that has got out of control. It's very formal. Example, there were so many people in the town centre celebrating New Year's Eve that I got separated from my friends in the melee. Seething is an adjective that means very angry. For example, the parents were seething when their teenager took the car without permission. Mob, an angry or disorderly crowd. The mob were out of control during the riot as they smashed windows and stole things. To squirm, means to wriggle or twist the body from side to side. For example, the little boy squirmed in his seat because he was bored. Okay. Azure just means bright blue. This example is a bit of a personal one. I can really feel it. In the grey Scottish winters, I dream of white beaches and azure skies. It's a little bit cold and grey outside. Anyway, next one, whipcord. Just means a tough kind of cord. You can see it in the picture. Mirthful means full of mirth or merry or cheerful. And this is a very formal word, and we would usually say full of mirth rather than mirthful. For example, the friends became full of mirth as they told funny stories to each other at the party. Cachinnation means very loud laughter. I honestly cannot remember ever using this word in my life. It's really an advanced word. It's good to know. I know the meaning of it, but I've never used it, so I wouldn't say it's really useful for you. Yeah, okay, moving on. To trample, a verb, and it just means to roughly or carelessly step on something. That could be either literally or it could be emotionally. You could trample on someone's heart. So for example, ow, you just trampled over my foot. So trample on or trample over. To deign, to do something that one considers to be beneath one's dignity. So the cat and the dog, let's look at what this example means, or the dogs rather, there's more than one. The cat won't deign to come when called. The dogs will come when called. Look at that cute face on that dog. He's like, yay, I'm so happy to make you happy and to come running when I hear my name. The cat on the left, he's like, no way. I hear you, but I'm not coming over there. I won't deign to do that. It's beneath me. I mean, not every cat is like this. I've had some cats that come running when you call their name. And I love cats and their level of independence. But this is just a great example because most cats will look at you and they'll have an expression like, are you crazy? I'm not coming over there just because you're calling me. I won't deign to do that. So it's a good example to hold on to in your mind that the cat won't deign to come when called. And also it reminds you that we use this in the negative. So the cat won't deign to come when called, but we wouldn't really say the dogs will deign to come when called. We don't use it in the positive like that. Diverse adjective. This is an archaic, and by archaic I mean old and no longer used, version of the modern word diverse. So diverse, of course, means many, various. Just like cachinnation, it doesn't change your life to know that, but as you're reading the story with me, at least you will know that this is not a typo. And a typo, of course, just means a typing error in spelling. Okay, moving on. Perplexed is an adjective that just means completely baffled, very puzzled, confused. For example, I called him by the wrong name. No wonder he looked so perplexed. Vehement. Most commonly used actually in the adverb form, which is vehemently. It means with strong feeling, forceful, passionate, or intense. So, an example, the defendant vehemently claimed he was innocent in court. Analogy is a similarity or comparison. So, for example, the year 2020 was a roller coaster. Analogous means comparable. So, for example, the year 2020 is analogous or comparable to a roller coaster because there were lots of ups and downs and so many unexpected things in that year. Not just means nothing. This is archaic, but it is still used in extremely formal circumstances in the UK. An example, in a business situation, the investment in redecorating the head office was all for naught as the company had to move. All for naught. It was all for nothing. Okay, maddening means extremely annoying. It is maddening to me when people drive too fast on the motorway. Ceaseless means constant and unending. For example, the ocean is ceaseless in the way that it moves as the tide is coming in and going out continually. Bauble, a small showy trinket or decoration. At Christmas, we hang beautiful shiny baubles on our Christmas tree. Non-entity, something not important or not interesting. Give you a little bit of a personal opinion example. It maddens me that politicians say that climate change is really important, but it feels like the moment that they win the election, it's almost as if for them, the topic suddenly becomes a political non-entity, and they end up doing what feels like nothing. Okay, moving on from my own opinions, coveted means greatly desired or envied. Oh, this is another actually personal example because I really love watching the TV program British Bake Off with my family because we love to see who is going to win the coveted prize of Star Baker for that week. If you haven't seen British Bake Off, have a look. It is just a good way to waste your time if you're looking to relax and watch something that won't really tax your brain too much, but is kind of fun and innocent. Okay, Gradgrind. This is an allusion, i.e. reference, to a merciless, cruel businessman in Charles Dickens' novel Hard Times. So the name Gradgrind is sometimes used to signal someone who is being merciless or cold-hearted. Victor means a winner. It's a really formal way of saying winner. So for example, the sports competition gave a prize to the victor of each race. Transitory, which means temporary. The emotions that you feel as you watch a movie are pretty transitory because 1 minute you might be laughing and the next minute you might be crying. Okay, I think this is the last one, savage, which means fierce, violent, uncontrolled. For example, I was scared to see a pack of wild and savage dogs roaming the street. We made it! We got to the end of all of those vocabulary words. That was no easy task, so just give yourself a pat on the back. We're not quite finished though. If you are up for it, then it's time for some speaking practice. Again, grab your phone and record yourself speaking your answer in as much detail as possible. Make sure to pause the video after the question so that you can do that. So, number 1, describe the last time that you were really seething. Can you think of something that you wouldn't deign to do? Which aspect of the English language leaves you the most perplexed? Describe a belief you would vehemently defend. And that's it. It would also be really great writing practice to leave your answer to one of those speaking prompts in the comment section. So I encourage you to have a go at doing that. And also just a reminder, if you would like to have access to a transcript of these lessons, as well as
Hello and
interactive
welcome to
quizzes,
lesson 3
then you might
of
like
the
to
mini
check out my
course
free
on the
resource
short story
library.
10
The link is in the
Minutes
description.
Musing
Thanks,
by
and
Alice
see you in the next
Dunbar
lesson
Nelson.
when we will
This
be
is
reading
part
the story.
of a 4-lesson series, so if you haven't seen lesson 1 where we go through the brief introduction to the author, lesson 2 where we look at the pre-reading vocabulary, I would suggest that you go back and look at those. In this lesson we are going to be doing a read-along of the actual story. I really recommend that you just follow along with the video and you don't get too caught up in worrying about the vocabulary. I really would love for the first attempt that you just follow along, read it, and see what amount of the meaning you can pick up from the first reading. Okay, it is an advanced story. It's a great challenge. Let's take it on. Let's jump in and let's read the text.
10 Minutes Musing by Alice Ruth Moore, also known as Alice Dunbar Nelson. Here you can see that this is an advanced level text. Published 1895 as part of the collection of stories called Violets and Other Tales. This text is in the public domain. Read by Sarah Hoshiquelu from Free Your English. We are using a dyslexia-friendly font and background. There was a terrible noise in the schoolyard at intermission. Peeping out the windows, the boys could be seen huddled in an immense bunch in the middle of the yard. It looked like a fight, a mob, a knockdown, anything. So we rushed out to the door, hastily, fearfully, ready to scold, punish, console, frown, bind up broken heads, or drag wounded forms from the melee as the case might be. Nearly every boy in the school was in that seething, swarming mass, and those who weren't were standing around on the edges, screaming and throwing up their hats in hilarious excitement. It was a mob, a fearful mob, but a mob apparently with a vigorous and well-defined purpose. It was a mob that screamed and howled and kicked and yelled and shouted and perspired and squirmed and wriggled and pushed and threatened and poured itself all seemingly upon some central object. It was a mob that had an aim, that was determined to accomplish that aim, even though the whole azure expanse of sky fell upon them. It was a mob with set muscles, straining like whipcords, eyes on that central object, and with heads inward and sturdy legs outward, like prairie horses reversed in a battle. The cheerers and hat throwers on the outside were mirthful, but the mob was not. It howled, but howled without any cachinnation. It struggled for mastery. Some fell and were trampled over. Some weaker ones were even tossed in the air, but the mob never deigned to trouble itself about such trivialities. It was an interesting, nervous whole, with diverse parts of separate vitality. In alarm, I looked about for the principal. He was standing at a safe distance, with his hands in his pockets, watching the seething mass with a broad smile. At sight of my perplexed expression, someone was about to venture an explanation when there was a wild yell, a sudden vehement disintegration of the mass, a mighty rush and clutch at a dark object bobbing in the air, and the mist cleared from my intellect as I realized it all. Football. Did you ever stop to see the analogy between a game of football and the interesting little game called life, which we play every day? There is one, far-fetched as it may seem, though for that matter, life's game, being one of desperate chances and strategic moves, is analogous to anything. But if we could get out of ourselves and soar above the world, far enough to view the mass beneath in its daily struggles, and near enough the hearts of the people to feel the throbs beneath their boldly carried exteriors, the whole would seem naught but such a maddening rush and senseless-looking crushing. We are but children of a larger growth, after all, and our ceaseless pursuing after the baubles of this earth are but the struggles for precedence in the business playground. The football is money. See how the mass rushes after it? Everyone so intent upon his pursuit until all else dwindles into a ridiculous nonentity. The weaker ones go down in the mad pursuit and are unmercifully trampled upon. But no matter. What is the difference if the foremost win the coveted prize and carry it off? See the big boy in front, he with iron grip and determined, compressed lips? That boy is a type of the big, merciless man, the Gradgrind of the later century. His face is set towards the ball, and even though he may crush a dozen small boys, he'll make his way through the mob and come out triumphant. And he'll be the victor longer than anyone else, in spite of the envy and fighting and pushing about him. To an observer, alike unintelligent about the rules of a football game and the conditions which govern the barter and exchange and fluctuations of the world's money market, there is as much difference between the sight of a mass of boys on a playground losing their equilibrium over a spheroid of rubber and a mass of men losing their coolness and temper and mental and nervous balance on change, as there is between a pine sapling and a mighty forest king. Merely a difference of age. The mighty, seething, intensely concentrated mass in its emphatic tendency to one point is the same in the utter disregard of mental and physical welfare. The momentary triumphs of transitory possessions impress a casual looker-on with the same fearful idea that the human race, after all, is savage to the core and cultivates its savagery in an inflated happiness at own nearness to perfection. But the bell clangs sharply, the overheated, nervous, tingling boys fall into line, and the sudden transition from massing disorder to military precision cuts short the 10 minutes musing. Okay, so that is it for our story. Now it is time for some speaking practice. I really encourage you to listen to the speaking prompt, pause the video, grab your phone, and record yourself speaking in response to that prompt in as much detail as possible. If you hear the prompt and you think, oh my goodness, I have no idea, I just didn't understand what that story was about, then perhaps you might want to skip forward to lesson 4, where we'll go through the meaning together. And then you could come back to these prompts and do it after and just speak out aloud your response at that point. Okay, so here are the speaking prompts. What is the story about? Where is the story set and how can you tell? The setting is the place such as a beach or a bank, etc. How did the story make you feel? In this lesson, we are going to look at the meaning of the short story 10 Minutes Musing by Alice Dunbar Nelson. Of course, if you haven't read the story, it would be good to start back at lesson 1 in this mini course, otherwise none of this will make any sense. Let's start with a discussion of general meaning. We'll go through the 5 W's. Who, what, where, when, and why. As you see questions come up throughout this video, I highly recommend you pause the video, grab a notepad, and see if you can write down what your thoughts are before I give you the answer. We'll begin with looking at who. Who is the protagonist, the main character of the story? The main character is a teacher. This character is also the narrator, person telling the story, and this means the story is written in a first-person point of view. A first-person narrative style is when the narrator is a character in the story, dictating events from their perspective, using I or we. What happens in the story? What is the teacher watching? Write down your answer. We're going to leave this one on pause for a moment and come back to it. Where? Where is the story set? Where is the setting? i.e., where does the action take place? Answer: the action takes place in a playground where pupils are gathered during their break from lessons, their intermission. In the UK, we use the word pupil to describe a child who's studying at school. In the US, they use the word student. Similarly, playground is a UK word, and schoolyard is the American or US version. When does the story take place? Answer: the event happens in the middle of the school day at intermission, also known as interval or break time. Why? Why is this event important? Answer: the author is making a point about life. We'll come back to this as well in a moment. Okay, so I said we would talk a little more about what happens in the story. Well, to understand this, you really need to understand and think about this question. What is the narrator watching? Is it a huge fight in the playground? Or a football match in the playground? So is it a fight or is it a football match? If you answered a football match, then you are correct. Well done. Let's look in a little more detail at the plot, which is what happens in the story. In this short story, there are really three distinct sections. One, the panicked external action at the beginning that the narrator sees. Two, the narrator's musings. Three, a return to seeing external events. Can you take a moment and write down as much as you have understood for each section? Think about what happens in each of these three sections. It might help to go back to lesson 3, as it is a difficult story but quite a short one, so you could read the story again and that might help. Plot, section 1, external action. The first person narrator is a teacher who hears a terrible noise and sees a crowd of boys. All the teachers rush outside, thinking it is a huge fight they will have to stop. The narrator describes how brutal the crowd is and describes them as a mob. What impact does it have that the story starts with the teachers panicking that there seems to be a big fight outside? Have a think about that and write down your answer. Well, really, this develops a sense of fear and violence and makes it clear that the mob have power. It also creates a sense of chaos, as there is a sense of panic because those who are supposed to be in charge are not. They are worried people have been hurt. Plot, section 2, internal musings. The narrator realizes it's a game of football. She reflects on the game of football and how hard the children are playing it and compares that to the game of life. Just as the bigger boys have no concern for the smaller when they are trying to win, so too, she says, humans in real life, and especially in the business world, all too often will use their power to trample on others. So she reflects on power in this section as well. What impact does this section of musing have? It allows the narrator to use the football game as a chance to reflect on humanity's desire for power and money. This is really the why of the story. This is why the football game is important. That analogy is at the center of it all. Plot, section 3, return to external action. The school bell ringing brings the students back to their reality of being at school, and they shift from mass disorder to military precision. The narrator observes them falling into line. There is a shift from the musing to the narrator's day-to-day reality. The ending feels like a sharp transition back to reality. Perhaps the suggestion is that we don't get enough time to reflect on our lives. It's rare to be an observer, just musing about what is happening. Do you remember those speaking questions from the end of lesson 3? I'll read them out again. You might like to pause the video and try answering them again. There will also be a few new speaking prompts. What is the story about? Where is the story set and how can you tell? How did the story make you feel? What are the main themes, big ideas, of the story? Do you agree with the narrator's views on life? And then I would love to ask, what questions do you still have? Leave me a question in the comment section and let me know. Okay, that is the last lesson of this mini course of 4 lessons. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for getting to the end of all 4 of them. And I look forward to seeing what questions you have. Thanks. Bye for now.